We are LifeChurch Livonia.
Good morning, LifeChurch Livonia. How is everyone? It is good to be here with you. My name is Brian. I'm the pastor here, and I would love a chance to meet you. So if you are new or if I've just never had a chance to meet you, make sure to introduce yourself after the service. I would love to get to know you. And listen, we're in the middle of a series I am just loving. It's called IMagIN. And if you weren't here last week, just to kind of catch you up on where we're at, this is a series where we're asking you to engage that place inside of you where your head and your heart meet and your imagination comes to life. And specifically, what we're asking people to do is to use your imagination to envision what church could be like if we lived fully into the mission and the vision that God has called us to do. And so if you are a guest here, my hope is that today what we would do is we'd pull back the curtain for you and let you see what it is that we feel God is calling us to do, because I really think it's beautiful. And I think what will happen is as we pull that curtain back and allow you to see what God has implanted inside of us, you'll understand that our heart is for you and that God is for you and that there's something beautiful and amazing that can happen when we allow God to work in our life. When we allow ourselves to be transformed by the power of the good news of Jesus Christ. And so imagine what it would look like if we lived fully into that mission and vision. Imagine what it would be like if we became radically transformed by the gospel and became a people that didn't just hear the good news, but became people that brought the good news. And so last week what we said is this, is that we want to be a church that becomes a place where people don't just come to hear the gospel, but instead are so radically transformed by the love of God that everywhere they go, the gospel goes to. A church that's going into their neighborhoods, it's going into their workplace, it's going into their schools, it's going into their friend circles, and they are bringing the good news of Jesus Christ with them everywhere they go. And what I've seen over the last few years here at LifeChurch Livonia is that we are becoming that. We're becoming that kind of a place, but I believe there's even more. There's even more in our city. There's even more in this region. There's even more inside of this church. There's more inside of us. There's more inside of you that God wants to draw out. And what we're saying is this, is what would it look like if we went from imagination to reality, from just dreaming that it was possible to actually experiencing that it's possible. And we move from imagination to reality when we say, I'm in. That's how we move. That's how we get it out of our head and our heart into action, is when we say, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's do it together. And so the reason that we call this series Imagine is that hidden within this idea of imagination are the two words, I'm in. We find these words inside of our imagination and we can say, I'm going to do it. I'm stepping up and I'm stepping in. So I want to tell you a story today about a guy that I think maybe only two people in this room know. It's Jeff and Becca, who worked with me in Alaska. I lived there for 5 years. And when we were at this church, I got there. The church was a really thriving, growing church in a community of about 35,000. And in the 5 years that I was there, we went from a church of about 450 people to a church of over 900 people. In a small little town. And you don't grow like that unless people are inviting their friends. Unless something is happening in our midst, unless there's individuals amongst us that are saying, I'm in. And there was one guy in particular that stands out in my memory as a shining example of what it looks like to say, okay, God, we're going to take this from our imagination to reality, and I'm going to do it by saying I'm in. And his name was Crandall Randall. It's a fantastic name. It's his real name, Crandall Randall. Crandall was the manager of the local gas station. It was right in front of the grocery store. It was the prime place where everyone went. There was only like 3 gas stations in town at the time, and Crandall was the manager of one of them. It was just a simple guy, sometimes a little crass, honestly. He did a lot of custodian work around church as well. He was never a guy that would lead a Bible study. I don't ever remember him getting up on stage at the church. He wasn't a part of our worship team, thank goodness, because I've heard him sing. He was just a normal, everyday, average guy that sometimes was even a little curmudgeon-y, honestly. One time I tried to help him with the barbecue grill, and he got so frustrated with me that he told me that if I didn't leave him alone, he was going to make me wear my teeth as a necklace. I don't even know what that means, but I knew that it was a threat, right? Crandall Randall, he was amazing, though. And the reason he was amazing is because he loved Jesus, and he wanted other people to experience that love. He loved God and he wanted other people to experience God's love. And so he told everyone he met about our church. Literally everyone. If they would come to the gas station to fill up, he wasn't just the guy that sat behind the counter and didn't interact with people. He was out and he was asking people if they needed help, and he was cleaning their windows and talking to them and engaging them and asking them if they needed anything else. And then always he would say, hey, do you go to church anywhere? I'm honestly surprised he didn't get fired from his job. Because Crandall Randall invited more people to Community Covenant Church in Eagle River, Alaska, I think, than all the rest of the people there combined. He was incredible. Just an average, normal, everyday guy who decided to say, I'm in. I'm into the mission and vision that God has called us to live out as a church, and I'm committed to doing my part. And one of the myths that I want to shatter this morning that I think many of us have is that being all in for the good news of Jesus, the only way to do that is to be a priest or a pastor. The only way to really do that is to be a full-time vocational missionary or a worker at a church. That's what it looks like to be all in. But I love that this guy, this gas station manager and part-time janitor at our church, was just as all in as I was, and I got paid to be at church. An unbelievable example of what it looks like for people like you and I, normal people, who are willing to just say, okay, God, use me. Use me in whatever way it is that you would like to use me. And what I want to do today is I want to go through Scripture, and we're going to look at numerous places in Scripture today. We're not going to stay camped in one section of the Bible today. We're going to go all throughout, from the Old Testament to the New Testament, to the time way before Jesus, to the time when Jesus was here, and the time after he was already gone. And we're going to look at people that are normal, everyday people, just like you and I. And I want to start in 2 Kings chapter 5. It says this: Now Naaman was a commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. So when you think of people that God uses in a powerful way, the heroes of stories, you might picture a guy like Naaman, the commander of the army, the strong right arm of the king of Aram. The Bible tells us he was a great man, not only in the sight of God, but in the sight of his master, and everyone highly regarded him. This guy was a total stud. He was a warrior, right? He led their people to victory over and over and over again. And he was not only was he a great leader, but he was a valiant soldier. And honestly, being the leader of the army, sometimes people weren't always valiant. They were sometimes led from the back, but it was really clear that Naaman was not the guy that led from the back. He was probably the man who led from the front. But he had leprosy. And the interesting thing about this story here in 2 Kings is that here in this moment, there's another person that enters into the story. The main story, the main arc of the story is all about Naaman and his leprosy. But there's another figure in this story that I think is just as significant, if not more significant than Naaman. The person that you would think is the most important character in the story. So let's go on. It says, now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. So here's a young girl. She was literally ripped away from home, carried off into slavery, alone, forced into servitude to the very leader of the army that actually captured her, now serving that man's wife. And I want you to imagine that you're her. Imagine what it would feel like to be her. Would you be excited to be there? This is not your dream job, people. She didn't lay in bed at night and think, I want to be carried away by bands of raiders and serve a mistress. No, there's no way. She might have been bitter at times, hopeless for sure at times, weepy at times, filled with sadness and longing. And absolutely, I'm convinced that this young woman would have felt powerless. Powerless. in a strange land with strange people. And she could have been tempted in that moment to give up a hope that God could ever use a person like her. But instead, what does she do? She sees that this commander of armies is suffering. She sees that this man is suffering from leprosy, some type of skin condition that probably would have made him miserable. I can't imagine what it was like to be Naaman. And so she speaks simply, and she speaks directly, and she speaks with the authority of God. And she says, listen, I see your struggle, and I know a place where you can go. I know a man that if you could talk to him, that God has empowered him to do miraculous things. She didn't have that power. She didn't have any miraculous ability to touch him and be healed or tell him exactly what he needed to do to be healed. She hadn't been empowered by God to do that kind of work. But she used what she had so that God could use what he had. She used her voice and her faith, and God added his power. And Naaman was healed because he listened to her words and did what she said. And he made the journey, and he met the prophet. And the prophet told him what to do, and amazing things happened. A powerless girl in slavery said, I'm all in still. And God used her. So we jumped into the New Testament, into the story of Jesus, into Luke chapter 10. And starting in verse 38, there's a story that for some of us is really familiar. It's a story that we've taught on here at this church before, but I want you to hear it with new ears. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. What I want you to do is remember that this story isn't just about Jesus. It's not just about Jesus and his disciples. There's other characters in the story, Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus. And most of the time when we preach this story, what we do is we either talk about Lazarus, who became one of Jesus' close friends, or we talk about Mary and Martha, and we compare the way that they responded to Jesus and the way that Martha was a kind of a busybody and was working really hard, and then Mary just sat at the Lord's feet, and we compare them when we talk about how you might respond to Jesus if he was in your home. But I want you to look at it a little differently today. I want you to look at these women a little differently today. And imagine yourself in their shoes, thinking to themselves, well, here's Jesus. We know he's a great man, and we know that he has this following, but what do we have to offer? Well, we have our home, but imagine how self-conscious you would be to invite Jesus into your home. Mary and Martha did it anyway. They opened their home to Jesus and his disciples as a ministry retreat center. I know what it's like as a pastor to feel the press of ministry, to feel the exhaustion of ministry, and to come to a spot where you just need a bit of a break. You need a safe place where you can kick your feet up, where you can relax, where you can just take a deep breath, away from the crowds, away from the conversations, away from the struggle of ministry. And Jesus and his disciples would have needed that kind of place as well. And Mary and Martha saw it, and they said, hey, come to our house. Take your sandals off. Relax. Martha's like, I'm going to feed you an amazing meal. That's why she was busy in the kitchen. They don't tell us what she served them. I imagine it might have been like something amazing, like matzo ball soup or something. I don't even know. Maybe they didn't even eat matzo ball soup. Maybe that came way later in the history of the Jewish people. I don't know what they ate, but imagine Jesus going there, relaxing, at peace with all of his disciples, a break from ministry, and being served by these amazing women and hanging out with this guy named Lazarus who became their friend. They might have felt self-conscious, but instead they decided just to set aside self and instead serve Jesus. If you flash forward in the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, you see another moment in Jesus' ministry when Lazarus grows ill and he ends up passing away from his illness that he had. And Jesus is too late to come to heal him. And there's this moment, this beautiful moment where Jesus engages the two sisters, and Lazarus is lying dead in a tomb. And Jesus is overcome with emotion. And it's the shortest Bible verse in the Bible. It's the words, Jesus wept. It's the verse that all the kids picked as their memory verse in kids' church, right? And most of the time we say Jesus wept because of this close relationship he had with Lazarus, but I think it actually might have been because he was afraid he would never get matzo ball soup again, right? That's probably not it. Listen, they opened their home. Come, rest. They didn't worry about what they didn't have. They didn't worry that they couldn't become a teacher and follow Jesus. They just said, here's what we have. We have a home and we have the ability to care well for you. And they gave it over so Jesus could do it. They said, we're all in. We're all in with what we have. So then we jump into the book of Acts. And into the middle of a story about the Apostle Paul. Most of us have heard about the Apostle Paul and all the incredible things he did. And in the midst of a story about his missionary journeys and all these incredible miracles that he did and all these churches that he planted and all these people that he reached, it was incredible what Paul was doing. Right in the middle of that story, in Acts chapter 18, it says this: Meanwhile is always an indicator that there's something else going on in the story that maybe isn't the main storyline, but is important to the story. And it says, meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor and taught about Jesus accurately, though he knew only the baptism of John. There's a whole bunch of things we could look at in this passage of scripture, but let me just point out a couple things right off the bat. Apollos was a native of Alexandria. Does anyone know what Alexandria was known for? Their library. The library in Alexandria at one point was one of the wonders of the world. There were more volumes in Alexandria. It was where that entire region, all of the accumulated knowledge of the entire region was stored in the library at Alexandria. When that library was destroyed, it was one of the greatest losses to our knowledge bank that we've ever had in the history of humanity. Apollos not only studied there, he grew up there. This is the guy that knew things. This is a guy that would have been the equivalent of like the PhD in all of the things that you would need to know in order to be a great teacher for Jesus. And it says that he had a thorough knowledge of the scriptures. It says that he taught about Jesus accurately. And so when you look at this guy, you think, well, this is the kind of guy that Jesus uses. This is the kind of guy that great things come out of. This is the kind of person that God chooses to do mighty things in and through. And you'd be right. Apollos was utilized by God to do amazing things. But this story isn't really about Apollos. It's about someone else. Listen to what happened in verse 26. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, which was just where the Jewish people gathered. And when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. Who in the world were Priscilla and Aquila? You have this guy Apollos, one of the most learned people that they had probably ever met. And you might think, well, then Priscilla and Aquila, they must have had some special education. They must have gone to some special school. If they know more about God, if they're going to explain God to Apollos, who would even dare do that? This guy was like a visiting scholar. And here's the thing. Priscilla and Aquila, they were tent makers. They were tent makers. They made tents that people slept in or did business in. They were people that could sew, who just happened to meet another guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul, who was also a tent maker. They like met up at like some trade show or something. I don't even know. And they hung out with Paul. They invited Paul into their home. And their time spent with Paul, They learned a couple things about God. They weren't scholars. They were just people that didn't just know about Jesus. They were individuals who had experienced Jesus. And they said to Apollos, we see that you're teaching things about Jesus that are accurate, but something's missing. We said, we might not be scholars, we might not be as learned as you, but we'd like to give you what we have. Would you come home with us? Hang out with us. We would love to add value to your already amazing ministry and equip you to teach the way of God more adequately. I believe they added the heart and the soul to his message. But I can promise you, there was probably a moment when both Priscilla and Aquila probably felt inferior to Apollos. They probably felt like, who are we to teach this guy? He is amazing. So we've already talked about 3 people, one of whom probably felt powerless. Some other people that probably felt self-conscious about their home. Now a couple who probably felt inferior, and yet all of them said, I'm in, and God used them in incredible ways. Unbelievable ways. And so we jump once again back into the Old Testament, into the story of Moses. And even if you've never come to church, you probably know who Moses is. We've made animated movies about the guy. We've made other incredible blockbusters about Moses' life because Moses was a classic hero. He's the guy that raised his rod and the Red Sea parted and called plagues down on Egypt and led the people out and met God and got the 10 Commandments. This guy was a stud in ministry. And in the middle of Moses' story, in the book of Exodus, we find some other unlikely heroes to the story. Because in one of those incredible encounters between God and Moses, God says to Moses, I want you to build a place of worship. Moses, I get it. You're in the middle of the desert. You're fleeing Egypt where you were in captivity for generations. You're on the run from pursuers. You're in the midst of really hard situations. You're just trying to survive. But by the way, I want you to build this incredible thing called a tabernacle so that you can worship me. And Moses, I can imagine what he's thinking. Well, how in the world, God, are we going to do that? Moses wasn't a builder. It wasn't like the leader of a people that were settled in a spot where he could tax them and raise funds to build this thing. No, what did he have to do? Moses was dependent upon normal, everyday people to bring this vision that God had given them into reality. And into that story come 2 men whose names I struggle to even pronounce. Bezalel and Oholiab. Bezalel and Oholiab. Who were they? They were artists. Can you imagine how useless you would feel as an artist in the midst of fleeing from captivity as a refugee? Like, where is the place for us to stop and paint or carve something or build something or make something beautiful? No one thinks about that kind of stuff when they're fleeing for their lives. You would feel completely useless. And in the midst of this story, God brings Moses to these 2 men, Bezalel and Oholiab. And what happened is unbelievable. 2 men who were skilled artisans brought Moses' vision of the tabernacle to life through their gifts. Moses said, if we're going to live into this vision that God has given me, I'm going to need help because there's skill sets out there, there's abilities out there that I don't possess, that they're different than my own. And he believed that together we can create something amazing. And he did it in partnership with 2 men and a whole bunch of other people that probably prior to this moment felt useless. Normal, everyday, average people. And they come when Moses calls. He says, I need skilled tradesmen. And they come. And Bezalel and Oholiab, they actually become the overseers of this group of carvers and engravers and craftsmen. And they all gather and they're like, we're set. We're going to build this tabernacle. And they're like, but we have nothing to build it with. No supplies. Nothing that we need. And so Moses puts out another call. And I want you to listen to what happens in Exodus chapter 36. I want you to remember that these people were on the run in the middle of the desert. And then Moses summoned Bezalel and Oholiab and every skilled person to whom the Lord had given ability, who was willing. That word is really important. Who was willing to come and do the work. They received from Moses all of the offerings of the Israelites had brought to carry out the work of constructing the sanctuary. And the people continued to bring free will offerings morning after morning. Pause there for just a moment. All of these people were just doing what they were willing to do. All of these people said, I'm in. And they proved it by what they did. Not just with their words, but by what they did. And remember that they are on a journey. And the only supplies they have is what they can gather from the immediate countryside or what they carried with them on their backs. And it goes on and says, so all the skilled workers who were doing all the work on the sanctuary left what they were doing and said to Moses, the people are bringing more than enough for doing the work of the Lord commanded to be done. Then Moses gave an order and they sent this word throughout the camp. No man or woman is to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. And so the people were restrained from bringing more because what they had already brought was more than enough to do all the work. This is what happened in this moment. Moses is like, hey people, God commanded us to build this beautiful tabernacle. I've got this skilled tradesman, but we don't have the supplies. Can you help us out? And so many people came that Moses was like, whoa, stop, we don't need any more. Don't bring any more. No more wood, no more supplies, no more art, no more things that you can use for the tabernacle. We have more than enough. The skilled tradesmen are coming to Moses and saying, would you please tell them to stop because we can't even get any work done because every day more and more deliveries are coming of supplies that we need to build their tabernacle and enough is enough. This is incredible. This story is miraculous that they even would have enough in the first place to make the project come to completion, let alone have more than they needed. But all of these normal, everyday people said, I'm in, and it was more than enough. Now I promise this, that I will probably never have to say stop serving at LifeChurch Livonia. I hope that we never come to a day when I have to turn people away from serving. And honestly, I would honestly love to have that problem. Where we say, whoa, no, we don't need any more volunteers. Whoa, no, we don't need any more people working in Life Kids. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But maybe it could. If we all said I'm in, it would. What if that happened here in our midst? I think the only way that's going to happen is if we say I'm in. The only way it's going to happen is if we realize that none of these people were trained pastors. None of these people were priests. None of them went to seminary. They didn't get any special training. And none of them were the heroes in these stories. If I assign these 4 texts to all of you and I ask you, who is the hero in the story? I promise you that none of you would come up with these people. Because they didn't have superpowers. They weren't Naaman, the commander of armies, or Jesus, or Moses, or Apollos. They were simple, everyday, normal people who would typically not be known as a hero, but they were heroes to me. Heroes to me in the same way that you are heroes to me. You, the ones who work a normal job, 9 to 5 or 8 to 7 sometimes, or you're a mom or a dad or whatever it is that you do throughout the week, and still you say, I'm all in, and you bring what you have. Because you become heroes. We become heroes because of what God does. When normal people offer who they are and what they have to God, He does extraordinary things with what they have to offer. When normal people offer who they are and what they have to God, God steps in. He adds His power. He adds His purpose. He adds everything that we need, His provision. And He does extraordinary things with what they offer. No matter who you are, God will use you if you say, I'm in. So what's holding us back? What holds us back from stepping into everything that God calls us to be and everything that God calls us to do? Because here's what I promise you. When you find that spot, when you step up and serve, you not only add something to your schedule, you add significance to your life. Significance to your life. So what's holding us back? And I think the first thing is this. Sometimes we feel inadequate. We feel inadequate because we think that the only people with great wisdom or great knowledge or some special skill can do great things with God. We compare ourselves to other people. And we play this comparison game so often that it paralyzes us and prevents us from stepping up and stepping in. It prevents us from saying, I'm all in, because we assume that even if we said that we wouldn't be needed. And we feel inadequate. We think to ourselves, who am I? I'm no Mother Teresa. I'm no Saint Peter. I'm not an incredible teacher like Apollos or Paul. Who am I? And we don't say I'm all in because we feel inadequate. And sometimes it's not just our inadequacy or our worry that we don't know enough or that we aren't enough. It's that we don't even feel worthy. We feel unworthy to step up and step in. We think that there's no way God would want to use me for great things because I struggle too hard. I'm too messed up. I'm too broken. There's things about me that I struggle with that even my spouse doesn't know. And because of that, we feel unworthy, and we prematurely disqualify ourselves from doing anything significant with God because we think that we have to get right before we can step in. We think that we have to get our life together before we can do life together. And because of that, we feel unworthy. But here's the truth. Read the scriptures. See the people that God uses. He even used prostitutes and murderers. He used liars and thieves. He used people that had done things that none of you in this room have ever even considered doing. And he took them and he made them worthy. And he used them for great thing. The truth is this, is that none of us are adequate in and of ourselves. All of us are unworthy. And our adequacy and our worth come from God as gifts from him. This is what God does. With the gifts of God, we become more than adequate. And through the grace of God, we become worthy. I love this. God doesn't just make us adequate. He makes us more than adequate. And I love this. That God doesn't just make us worthy. He makes us clean, pure, and holy, righteous people who are now in a spot where we can serve him, where we can say, I'm in. This is the good news. This is the hope of the gospel. And I hope that it becomes for you an opportunity to step out of those spaces of inadequacy, to step out of those places of unworthiness and step into something amazing. Because I'm convinced that there's people in our midst that are like the slave girl who just feel powerless. But God will add his power to your voice if you just choose to use it. There's people here in our midst that feel self-conscious. Maybe a little like Mary and Martha. And if you're willing to say yes to inviting Jesus into your space, amazing things will happen in your midst. Maybe there's people here that feel inferior, perhaps like Priscilla and Aquila. That you look around you and you think, man, I don't know nearly as much as they do, so what could I offer? God will add adequacy to your feelings of inferiority and lift you up, raise you up, and send you out. Maybe you're feeling like the artists wandering around the desert thinking, I am super useless. The skill set I have, I don't see any place for it. God says, there is no one that is useless. With the gifts of God, we become more than adequate. And through the grace of God, we become worthy. Just like Moses, who stepped up and said, God has given us a vision of what we are called to do, and I can't do it alone. I stand here on the stage today and say, God has given us a vision of what we are called to do in Livonia, to be real people, meeting a real God, to live real life, to be people that come into a place where we can know God, where we can grow in that relationship with God, and we can go and serve, to be people that are drawing individuals who are far from God into a life-transforming relationship with the Creator of all things. God has given us a vision that we are called to be part of that movement here in Livonia, in the Metro Detroit area. And I'm here standing here today saying, I cannot do it alone because I don't have the gifts to do it. I don't have a skill to do it. I don't have the time to do it. And even if I could, I shouldn't. Because God made you perfectly. He made you exactly the way he needed to fit into this thing called LifeChurch Livonia and to make it happen. every single one of you, young and old, have a space in this place. And I believe that through your decision to say, I'm all in, God will help us to accomplish the vision and mission of our church in the days to come. And then when we look back a year from now, 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, we will be blown away at what God has done in our midst, because he's made us more than adequate. And through the grace of God, he has made us worthy. Today, what I'm asking you to do as a church is to step up and step in and say, I'm all in. All around the room, you see tables set up. Ministry opportunities, places where you can step up and say, I'm all in. Places where you can say, I don't know if I have what it takes, but I'm willing to give what I have. And what I want to encourage you to do today is we're gonna get done with church a little early. We're going to cut it just slightly short, not so you can go home earlier, get to lunch quicker, or pick your kids up faster, but so you can stay in this room and linger. So you can interact with the ministry leaders that are going to be standing behind these tables. So you can begin to pray and ask the Lord, what is it that you would have me do? What is it that I'm willing to do? So take an opportunity for this ministry fair to stick around. Don't go anywhere until you've had a chance to talk to at least one person, because God has something for you. So what I want to do now is before we move into the next set of worship, what I want to do is take an opportunity to pray for those of you who are here today who feel inadequate, to pray for those of you who are sitting here today and you feel unworthy. I want to pray for the ones who feel powerless, the ones who feel inferior, the ones who feel self-conscious, and the ones who feel useless today. I want to pray for all of us, because we are normal people that God will take and make into heroes when we offer ourselves. Let's go there in prayer. So Jesus, I thank you that you use normal people like me. Humble people that aren't the smartest in the room or the funniest in the room, the most beautiful in the room, just normal, everyday people who say yes to you, who choose to say, I'm in when you call. And today, God, you're calling. You're saying, who will go? And we're sitting here saying, God, send me. We'll do it. So Jesus, I pray for those who sit here today struggling, feeling, wrestling with their inadequacy. God, I pray that you would add your power to their powerlessness. That you add your sufficiency to their feelings of being insufficient. That you would add your strength to their perception of how weak they are. That you would add your grace to them when they feel unworthy. That you would add your healing when they feel that they are sick. That you would add your forgiveness when they feel their sin and their shame, God. Today, we come to you, the author and the creator of life, just offering what we have, God. And we pray that you would add everything you have to us. That you would transform normal people into extraordinary heroes, because they are used by you. If you're here today and you are wrestling, you're struggling, you know you're far from God, you know that you're not in the place you need to be, you know that you're in a space where you are not stepping in, you're not saying I'm all in. If that is you today, I just invite you right now to, in the quiet of your own heart, just to pray and say, God, here I am. All of me. God, I don't even know what I need. If it's forgiveness, bring forgiveness. If it's power, bring power. If it's healing, bring healing. If it's strength, bring strength. If it's knowledge, bring knowledge. If it's wisdom, bring wisdom. God, add to us what is missing. We give our lives to you. In the name of Jesus, I pray.